Hello, I'm Ed Fuquay, Young Adult Librarian Extraordinaire here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
Solitaire Frisbee from the children's room.
We're having another Conversations, and we're continuing on the topic of African mythology. We've already discussed for a couple of weeks.
Yes.
We're heading deeper into the continent of Africa with the story of Mwindo. Yes, Mwindo, it's a great story. It has all the makings of an epic mythology. It follows Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, like hero's journey kind of thing, pretty closely actually.
Okay.
One of the criticisms of Campbell was that his theory mostly works for European mythology. But Mwindo is one of the first African characters we've seen who actually falls into that mold. He's very much a classic god king hero. The story comes to us from the Nyanga people of the Congo region. And it is a storytelling piece which has been around for a long time, that was only written down relatively recently, like a couple of decades ago.
It was very recent.
It is very recent. So, although many stories were preserved from Africa, for whatever reason, this one didn't get recorded and written down. So, existing as a storytelling piece, there's several different versions of every aspect of this story. I may go into some of the variations as I go along here. For generation after generation, it was only an oral performance. And when this is done, it's part of a huge ceremony. It's a multimedia event with singing and dancing, and there's a call and response from the audience, and food is handed out. I will not be singing or dancing, but in points of the story where I say the characters sing or dance, there actually is things that are supposed to go along with this.
Okay. And even though it's very, very recent, we still have multiple variations.
Yes, well, it's been around for quite a while, and every storyteller gives his own spin on it.
Okay.
So the variations will always exist, and until something is written down, anyone can do their own version of it.
Right.
So once the thing becomes set in stone, once they're written down, but all mythology was originally just oral.
Mm-hmm.
Everything. Even Homer's Odyssey was originally an oral piece.
Right.
People had to memorize that to do it. So the Nyanga people in the Congo region, it's called the Great Lakes region of Africa also. They still tell the story, it's still very popular, but it hasn't traveled beyond Africa like a lot of other stories. The story of Mwindo. Now, it begins with a magical birth. Like so many heroes, Mwindo has a magical birth. His father is King Mwindo, which literally means father of Mwindo. So you know what role he plays in the story. Now, Mwindo had 7 wives, and he wanted them to give birth to only daughters. Now, you may wonder why. Because in their culture, if you want to marry a woman, you come in, you give a huge dowry to her father. So long as he has daughters, he'll keep receiving money from guys that want to marry them. It's very expensive to marry a princess. So, however, if he had a son though, and his son decided to get married, then he would have to pay out for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, every one of his wives was always supposed to give him only girls. So that worked for a while. Yes, as you can imagine, it worked for a while, but it was his favorite wife. He eventually gave birth to a son. But it was no ordinary child. In fact, before birth, Mwindo was already doing supernatural things. While in the womb, he realized the difficulties his mother was having with things. And so he used his magic powers from inside the womb to help her. He would do things like cut wood and stir pots for her and things like that telekinetically while inside her womb. Very helpful.
Impressive.
Yeah, he was quite a baby. And when he was born with an axe in his hand, which sounds pretty painful.
That could be problematic.
Yes, very much so. There's several magic births we've already discussed, and there's more of them coming. He was born with an axe in one hand and a conga in the other hand. Now, when I hear the word conga, I generally think of a festive novelty line dance or a song by Gloria Estefan. But in this part of Africa, the word conga refers to basically a flyswatter. It's a length of wood with a buffalo tail on the end of it. You swish it around to scare away flies. It also looks kind of like a scepter in almost all the art depictions. So it looks kind of badass. It's his signature weapon, actually. He never uses the axe, by the way. The axe only figures in his birth sequence. I don't know why. but born with an axe in his hand is a pretty cool opening. You got to admit that.
It is.
It's pretty badass. And he was born, much like Hermes, that we'll meet later in Greek mythology. He was born able to walk and talk. A real time saver, that Mwindo. In fact, he began singing almost as soon as he was born.
I'm thinking of Family Guy's Stewie.
Yeah, kind of like that. And like Stewie, he was kind of obnoxious as well. He was very full of himself. He's born with magic powers. So his father heard the commotion, went to see what was going on, and was upset because it was a son. So he ordered his troops to kill the boy. Yep. Not a contestant for Father of the Year.
I don't think so.
Yeah. So his guards threw spears at him, and Mwindo turned them aside with his magic Congo. So none of the spears could harm him. And so the father says, okay, I can't stab him, but I can still get rid of him and never have to worry about him again. So he took Mwindo up, carried him away, dug a really deep pit, and then buried him in it.
It surprises me that after seeing these abilities, he didn't want to profit off of them.
Yeah, you'd think he'd find some way around this, but he's determined to get rid of the kid. So he buries him alive, covers up the dirt, goes to bed that night thinking, well, thank goodness that's over with. But he wakes up the next morning, and the first thing he hears is somebody singing, I am Mwindo, I could walk and talk when I was born, my father tried to kill me, but he can't. And so he looks out the window, and sure enough, there's the baby singing and dancing, where he was buried alive just, the night before. So, so the king says, okay, I can't stab him, and I can't bury him alive, but I can just get rid of him. So he grabs a drum and sticks the baby inside the drum and then sews it up tightly, and he hurls the drum in the river. Now they're alongside the Congo River, which is one of the longest navigable rivers in the world. It's a huge river that crosses 3/4 of Africa. And so he's taken away by the current and sails away, and the king thinks, well, thank goodness he's gone finally. But of course, that's not the end of the story. He floats downstream, and I guess he talked to his mother enough to know something about the whole family tree, because his mother has a sister named Nyanga, who is a goddess in her own right. In some versions of the story, he's actually his aunt lives upstream, so he's flowing downstream, so he has to go against the current to bring himself up to his aunt. But however he accomplished it, he does. So Nyanga, she's kind of a goddess herself. I say kind of because no one's ever said what she's a goddess of.
Oh.
She's actually powerful, extremely intelligent, very beautiful in every version of the story. She's married to a giant snake who controls the waters of the river. So yeah, she's really got it going on. She serves the function of the meeting with the goddess in Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces. In the hero's journey, this is the meeting with the goddess. And so Nyanga naturally pops him out of the drum and recognizes him immediately for who and what he is, and embraces him and says, I will raise you.
And she wasn't concerned about this in regards to the king wanting him
No,
gone.
not the least.
Okay.
The king had apparently forgotten about him. So he goes up a little bit. He becomes basically toddler size in most of the art depictions, although it's kind of hard to tell how much time passes.
Okay.
Once he gets older, he wants to get vengeance on his father. That's all he wants is to get rid of his father. And she warns him that it's probably not going to go the way you expect, but will not be deterred. So he leaves Nyanga, and he goes out to his mother's family. And there's a village there with all these warriors who are his uncles. And they're also fantastic blacksmiths. And so he wants to go after his father, which would be very, very dangerous. And so they decide to forge him. Now, there's different versions of the story. In one version of the story, they actually dismember him, and they put him onto an anvil and pound him out like metal to make him as hard as steel. Okay, there's a less gross version of that, in which they actually forge for him a suit of baby armor. I find baby armor funnier than the other version of the story, so we'll go with baby armor. Because I love the idea of this toddler, walking around in full plate mail. Yeah, so he has serious baby armor now, let's say. Now, Nyanga says that a great king doesn't, be in the forefront of the battle. He has to give orders to his people.
Right.
So he orders his uncles to fight the village of Tubando, which is where his father lives.
Mm-hmm.
So they attack Tubando, and unfortunately it does not go well for them. They're completely wiped out by Mwendo's warriors. They killed the last man. And so Mwindo has to go out with his magic conga and bring them all back to life one by tapping them on the head with his magic flyswatter. Now, he's become friends while he was with his aunt, with a bunch of gods and goddesses. One of them is Unkaga. I apologize if I'm mangling these names. Unkaga is the god of lightning. He's friends with Mwindo. And so he calls upon Unkaga to use his powers. And so Unkaga sends lightning down and kills every person in the village, wiping out the entire village of Tubando.
That's severe.
It is pretty severe. So he goes back to find his father, and his father's not there. He's not one of the bodies. He's disappeared. He discovers a hole in the ground where his father has uprooted a tree, and that creates a hole down into the underworld where the dead go. So he would rather go into the land of the dead than face his angry son. So
Understandable.
He's escaped into the underworld. And so our hero goes down after him. He goes through a whole series of adventures in the underworld. He finally runs into Kahindo, who is the daughter of Muisa, the god of the dead.
Okay.
She's a beautiful daughter. She has her own powers, but she's basically stuck in her father's realm and can't leave. But she agrees to help Mwindo. His beautiful daughters of evil gods and kings almost always help the hero. So she warns him, "You'll go before my father, and right away he'll offer you food. Or he'll offer you drink first. He'll offer you banana beer, fermented bananas. Sounds good, but you don't drink it. Bad for you. And then he'll offer you banana bread, which we all know is good. Banana bread. You can't beat that. You just don't eat the banana bread. It's bad for you. Now, it doesn't explicitly say why it's bad. There's different versions why, but I suspect it's because of the Persephone myth. And remember when you talked about the fairy realm?
Mm-hmm.
If you go to the fairy realm and you eat fairy food, you'll be trapped there forever and can't leave.
Right.
And Persephone in Greek mythology, which we haven't gotten to yet, found out the hard way not to eat anything when you're in the land of the dead either. For whatever reason, many different cultures all over the world believe that if you go someplace and eat the food, you're pretty much stuck there.
It's an interesting concept and intriguing that you find that repeating in places that don't really have much crossover.
Yeah, there's very little contact between these cultures, but they all have that same theory. There's also supposedly a cursed drinking fountain on Benefit Street in Providence. If you drink from that, you'll stay on an island the rest of your life. So, there you go. Okay, so he wants to go confront Muisa, the Lord of the Dead. So Muisa invites him in and is all magnanimous, and of course offers him banana beer, and he says, "No thanks," and then offers him banana bread, and no, still no. Now, Kahinda has told him that if you get his chance to do some challenges, take them. And so Muisa says, "Well, to qualify to speak to me, you must pass my test." And so Mwindo instantly said, "That's for me, I'll take the test." So the first thing he says is, you have to plant a grove of bananas and grow them overnight and harvest them, by tomorrow. Absolutely an impossible challenge, but he'll give him more, bananas for the bread and the beer he plans to make later. But of course, this is Mwindo we're talking about. So Mwindo summons a magic like hoe and magic baling hook and so forth, and he falls asleep and lets the magical tools do all the work for him. The tools plant the crops, it grows in a few hours, and then takes the baling hook and cuts down the bananas and came back to them to Muisa the next one and says, "Here you go, lots of bananas."
Fantasia, yes?
Kind of like Fantasia, yeah, he has all the tools do the work for him. He just waves his magic fly swatter and then falls asleep while they're working. He does not fill up the underworld with bananas, which would be really funny if he did. So Muisa sees this and thinks, "I gotta get rid of this kid. He's bad news." So he has a cowrie belt that's magic, which he takes off. He sends the cowrie belt flying through the air, and it strangles Mwindo and kills him, which you would think would be an impediment, but no, it's not, because as soon as he dies, his magic conga flies in the air, taps him on his own head, and he wakes up and is alive again. So then he goes to Muisa and taps him on the head and kills him, and then brings him back and says, "Don't do that again." So Muisa says, "All right, but there's one more task you have to do, one more task." And Mwindo says, "All right, let's hear it." So He says, there is a tree in the underworld that's full of honey, and you need to bring me honey from that tree. So he says, okay. So he knows how to deal with bees. He's still a toddler, but he's smart. So yeah, so he makes a fire and smokes out the bees so he can get to the honey, but he realizes the tree is actually made of metal rather than wood. And he can't reach the honey, and he can't split open the bark because it's a solid metal tree. So he calls on Unkaga, his friend the lightning, and he sends a lightning bolt shooting down from the heavens all the way, zigzagging through the underworld to hit the tree, splits it open as lightning tends to do to trees, especially metal ones. And then he scoops out the honey and brings it to Mwisa and says, here you go, Your Majesty, here is honey from your tree. Can I please have an audience now? So Mwisa reluctantly says, okay, why are you doing? What are you doing here? You're alive in the land of the dead. And he says, I'm on the run trying to chase my father, Mwindo, who's running from me. You have someone named Mwindo here in the land of the dead. He said, well, I did, but while we're going through all this rigmarole and ritual and so forth, your dad escaped the underworld. He's back on the surface now. Yeah. So after all that, he still can't find his dad. So he goes to the surface, hunts his dad down. After going through another whole set of adventures I won't go into here, finally corners his dad. And his dad is really repentant. His dad says, I realize I did wrong by you and your mother. I never should have attacked you. It was bad. I have no excuse for my actions. And Mwindo can't really bring himself to kill his dad. There are versions in which he exiles him. There's versions in which he lets him live in his village. He goes back to Tabundo, by the way, and brings every single person back to life again. So he actually has a village now, which he becomes the ruler of. The grateful villagers and several of the people who live in the area give him wives. So he now has 4 wives, a wife of each of the different tribes that live in the area. So he becomes the king. But he's still Mwindo. He's still kind of full of himself. He's still kind of hard to deal with, since the solution to most problems is to kill people and then bring them back to life again and make them apologize.
If you had that ability, though.
Yeah, it would be hard not to use it all the time. And Mwindo totally abuses his powers. Yeah. So he gets a hankering for pork. And so he sends some of his warriors out to kill a boar. Mm-hmm. So they go out, and the group is massacred. They come back, only one of them is alive. He staggers back to camp and says they were attacked by Kirimu, which is a 7-headed dragon that breathes fire from each of his 7 heads. So right away, Mwindo says, I can handle this. So he runs out to where the fight occurred, brings all his warriors back to life again, and says, I'll take charge of this. So he's now become a monster-slaying hero. He started out as a trickster hero, like Anansi and Hermes and so forth, and now he's a monster-slaying hero like Hercules.
Okay.
So he fights Kirimu, big fight. He has to bop Kirimu on the head 7 times with his magic conga. Tricky, while somebody's breathing fire on him.
Good thing it's magic, though.
Yeah, it's a good thing it's magic. He may have outgrown the baby armor by this point. The myth is a little fuzzy. So he finally succeeds, and he kills the dragon. So he drags it back to camp, and everybody is really grateful. Hoorah, he killed the monster. But one person who's not happy is Unkaga, the lightning. As it turns out, Unkaga, the lightning, and Kirimu, the fire-breathing dragon, were friends. They're buddies. They go back a long way. He looks down at the earth and sees that his old bud has been killed by this obnoxious kid, and he can't take it anymore. After everything he's done to help Mwindo out, now his best friend is killed.
Did Mwindo know?
He didn't know. He just assumed that he could get away with this.
Massive faux pas.
Yeah. Well, he assumes he can get away with anything because he always has. But Unkaga has had enough of it. So he comes down to earth in a lightning bolt and grabs Mwindo and takes him up into the heavens. First thing he does is show him his village. And Mwindo looks down and says, wow, Tabundo is really small. It's this tiny little place, and there's this huge earth all around.
Right.
And he realizes all of his travels and adventures have really only covered a tiny little part of this. And he starts to see things in perspective for the first time. In one version of this, after Unkaga berates him, he gives him to other gods and goddesses to talk to. Like the goddess of rain comes along and pelts him with like hail and sleet and pouring, driving rain and so forth. He has to go talk to the sun to apologize. So he's standing at the surface of the sun where it's really super hot trying to apologize for being so arrogant. And he also realizes, among other things, not only is like his village really small, but he's actually kind of small too. He thought he was a big gun, but it turns out there's always a bigger fish, which is one of the morals of the story here.
Yeah.
So in Mwindo, he realizes that really he hasn't been living a good life. So he's sent back to Earth to rule his people. And when he comes back, they're shocked at the changes in him. He's much more compassionate, much more patient, understanding with people. And he lays down a set of laws that people should live by. And the actual laws differ from one version of the story to another. But they all include things like, take care of your kids. There are no bad children. Don't make fun of handicapped people. That's almost always one of the lessons that Mwindo teaches. Being active is good, but also think before you act.
So would this be on par with like Hammurabi's code, or
A lot like that. Well, Gilgamesh went through something similar. He left his people behind to quest for immortality, and then realized that the only real immortality is to live a good life, and went back to lead his people. So Mwindo returned like Gilgamesh and became a much better, more compassionate leader for his people than he had been in his earlier life. One of the things is that because he had killed something without thinking, he made his people take a vow not to kill. So they ate a lot of vegetables, and they had other people in the area hunt for them. Apparently the Nyanga people are not hunters. And this is the cultural myth of why they do not hunt.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah. There's also, Africa is the home of a lot of secret societies. Young people are inducted into societies, and in that they're given the wisdom to become true men or true women, to become a pillar of their community. And the story of Mwindo is sometimes told as part of a membership ritual to a secret society for young men. And the things that he goes through, fighting something and being pelted by rain and things like that, are all like symbolically recreated for the young boys. And then they give him the list of things, be nice to strangers, don't make fun of handicapped people. There's a list of things they're given to do to become true men, and you don't kill anything.
So these are good societies.
Yeah. Although Nyanga did have people hunt for them, apparently. They just themselves didn't go into the woods to kill anything. So that's one of the reasons why it stuck with their culture for so long. So Mwindo, a great African hero. We make a terrific movie, at least the TV miniseries.
Is it a movie? Is it a movie?
No.
Not yet.
It's never been filmed.
Okay.
I couldn't even find decent footage of a storyteller filmed for YouTube. I could find storytelling versions of a lot of things. There's half a dozen Anansi stories on YouTube by actual African storytellers. Nothing from Mwindo, and I'm not sure exactly why. The Seattle Children's Theater gave a version of Mwindo that's considered one of the best. It was done in Seattle a few years ago, and there's some clips of it on YouTube, where all I was able to find the closest I could find to an actual telling of the story. Most of the people on YouTube that do a version of it have it animated.
Okay.
So in those versions, like I said, Mwindo's always strutting around with his flyswatter like a scepter and gesturing with it at people. So it does make kind of a cool, unique weapon.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yes, it is not that popular, but it really should be, because the Mwindo story is very cool. He fulfills so many of the niches of the different heroes that we've encountered before, different gods and heroes and so forth. He fulfills a lot of them in a way that's very familiar to Western culture. So what do you think?
I love it. I'm curious about what is on the horizon.
I may move away from Africa, although I could do Africa for months. Apart from mispronouncing things, I'm not sure I'm doing justice to any of these stories.
Well, I mean, introducing, is significant. Because as you said, this is really only circulated outside of the Congo?
Many of it has not been spread around the world. Unfortunately, the slave trade brought a lot of people from the west coast of Africa over to the Americas, and they brought a bunch of their storytelling and their culture with them as they could. So we have versions of Anansi that are told and retold all over the Caribbean and Central America and so forth. We discussed that last time we were talking about Anansi and his stories. But Mwindo stories come from a different part of Africa, and for whatever reasons, they were not brought over to America.
Well, that part of the Congo experienced more slavery internally versus being exported, right?
They experienced incredible brutality, not only during the colonial period, but immediately after the colonial period, when the Congo became swept up in a civil war that pretty much destroyed their culture. The Nyanga are one of several different people who live in this area. So the fact that they survived with any of their culture intact is just pretty miraculous. So we'll move on to other exciting stuff next week. Until then, I have been Ed.
Solitaire.
I'll see you next time. Until then, be safe.